for being with us today. I appreciate it. I know the members of this committee have heard me say this before. I represent the largest manufacturing district in the state of Ohio and also the largest agricultural district, so the two go hand in hand. And one of the things I try to do when I'm home, I go through as many factories as I possibly can get through. So the number one issue in my district is jobs. And I know that the chairman had asked a little bit about on the stimulus, and you made some comments earlier, but maybe you can make a comment on this from a statement that Mr. Bai made over the past week on the CBS Early Show. He said, if I could create one job in the private sector by helping to grow a business, that would be more than Congress has created in the last 6 months.
Could I not comment on what he said, but comment on the broader problem that we face together?
Well, but this is from a perspective of another individual that represents a Midwestern state that is, has a lot of manufacturing. And when the businesses in my district have really said to me, they've cut to the bone. They've laid people off. They're down to what really, to the point in a lot of cases, they're working 32-hour weeks. And I think what the senator said really reflects what's going on in the Midwest with the people in my area, because they've said we've cut, but what has the federal government done? How many? They asked me this question: how many federal employees has the federal government laid off?
Well, Congressman, I think if you look back at the record of actions that the Congress authorized at the beginning of the year, you saw very substantial tax cuts that went to 95% of working Americans, to small businesses across the country. You saw very substantial assistance provided to states so they could extend unemployment benefits, COBRA, make sure they are not firing teachers, cutting critical services. And you saw some very sensible targeted investments in infrastructure spending. And those actions, combined with what we did to put out the financial fire, have brought growth back to this economy.
Well, let me, if I could go with when CBO was here with the director a couple of weeks ago, or several weeks ago. And again, we've all talked about the word unsustainable, what's happening here. But in his testimony, he made this comment. Again, this is just commenting on the interest on the debt. But between 2010 and 2020, in nominal terms, from 207 billion to 723 billion. We will more than double as the share of the GDP from 1.4% to 3.2. But that interest, then, we're going to be spending, we're looking at $2 billion a day in interest payments. But, again, you have to read on what he says, is that's the CBO's baseline projections. If all these things happen, the projections assume the major provisions of the tax cuts enacted in 01, 03, and 09 expire as scheduled, that the temporary changes in the alternative minimum tax from affecting more taxpayers will not be extended, and that the baseline projections also assume that the annual appropriations rise only with inflation, which would leave discretionary spending very low to GDP by historical standards. And so, when we talk, this is the folks back home understand, is that we are in a situation that we're at critical mass right now. But, again, how do we go back and explain to the businesses? Because, again, when they look at all these things from cap and tax, you can go down the entire line, that nobody's going to make any moves right now to want to expand because they're not really sure what we're doing down here.
Well, you're exactly right that our deficits are too high. They are unsustainably high, and we have to be willing to work together to bring them down over time. But the President did, in his budget, propose specific ways to constrain spending growth and to make our tax system more fair, and those measures together bring our deficits down by more than half as a share of the economy over this 4-year period of time. So those are very substantial, very sharp cuts in policies. Now, people are going to disagree with them, but I think what we'd ask is that if you don't like that mix of policies, then propose some alternatives. But I think we met the test of proposing things that are going to be very unpopular, because the government has to demonstrate to the American people that we're prepared to go back to living within our means as well, just like we asked them to do.
Let me ask this one quick last question, because looking at the unemployment rate chart that they had given out that day, we're looking at getting into the 2014 to 2015 before we get back to quote-unquote normal employment in this country. And again, this is with all these cuts, everything expiring according to what CBO says. But are we looking at, through the president's budget, trying to get to that 2014-2015 period by that time frame?
Well, we're going to do everything we can, but it requires the Congress too. We can't do it on our own, to try to make sure that we're creating strong growth that's broadly shared, and that we have as many jobs created as possible with the growth that's going to come. But again, what you're seeing is just a measure of the damage caused by this recession. It just caused a huge amount of damage to basic confidence in business across the country. It's starting to heal. It's getting better. But I think we have a lot more work to do. But again, it requires the Congress, too. We can't do it on our own, to try to make sure that we're reinforcing the healing process, that we make it possible for businesses to invest again, and that they start to add back hours and employees that they cut so deeply in the face of the panic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Secretary. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.